Hi, everyone. Welcome to Beauty Talent Talk. Our mission is to inspire, share expert insights, and empower and support personal and professional growth. Today, we have our guest, Blair Lawson, CEO of Luna, and formerly worked at Beauty Counter and Goop. Blair, thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And Kirsty, our moderator.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's show. As always, if you have any questions for Blair or Debbie, please put them in the chat and I will bring them up as we go through.
So Blair, I appreciate you being here. I think this is a really important discussion and one that you have a lot of expertise on, which is the founder partnership dynamic. And, I want to frame the conversation today to really understand your career journey. And you came from Louis Vuitton, so a very corporate company, and you were enticed to go to founder-led brands. Can you share with us a little bit about your journey?
Sure, yeah. I had been working for LVMH, for a huge French company, for over a decade, and I had learned so much in that role, but I was kind of starting to get the itch to work for a smaller business, a US-based business. I think I really wanted to work in a context where I could have a more direct hand in the results and see really clearly and quickly the effect my work was having on the business. And so I wasn't necessarily expecting to work for a founder, but I think I was expecting to work for a smaller business or more of a startup. And I was introduced to Greg Renfrew, the founder of Beauty Counter, right after she had launched the brand in 2013. And she launched the business in March of 2013, and I met her that summer. And I just really believed in her vision for the business and for her brand and for the entire category that is clean beauty, which I really believe Greg had a huge hand in establishing and putting on the map. So I just wanted to be a part of that, of her vision for the business. I thought the strategy and the category were really interesting and compelling. So it wasn't so much about joining to work with a founder, but more the business itself. And since then, I've only worked for founders. Again, I think maybe more because I've been really interested in their businesses and really believed in their businesses and the value proposition that they were putting forward. So I worked for Greg at Beauty Counter once in 2013 to 2015, and then again in 2020 to 2022. And in between that time, I worked for Gwyneth at Goop for about 4 years. And now I work for Ashley Merrill, the founder of Luna. So really ever since my first founder job, I've been in that capacity.
And Blair, often when people go down a road they've never been down before, I often hear, I wish someone had told me this, or this was really surprising. So what would you say maybe are the underlining scenarios that you would want someone to share with someone? If you've known this, what were your takeaways from something like that and working with founders?
Yeah, I think what's one thing that's really important to remember, like the leader of a business or the CEO of a business always, to a certain extent, sets the tone and culture and way of working. Mm-hmm. But this is even more true in founder-led businesses, especially newer ones or startups, because there's not a lot of structure and process yet. There's not a lot of established culture, and there hasn't been time for the company or the business to really develop a culture that's independent of its leadership. So the experience in a founder-led business is just by definition more personal. Like what the founder feels, the whole company is going to feel. The way the founder works is going to be the way the whole company works. So I think you have to be really aware of that when you're going into a founder-led business, particularly if you're coming from a much more corporate, structured, established environment. There's just an element of personal to it that you might not be used to.
And when you had your first experience, startup, Beauty Counter with Greg, what would you say were the biggest hurdles that you found yourself having to really cross and learn and establish something different in your skill set?
I think so. This is true for founder businesses, and it's also just true for startup. And
Sure.
a lot of times they're one and the same. You have to be flexible and adaptable. Like you have to be able to kind of roll with the punches and understand your founder's style. That you also have to develop the ability to know when to hold your ground, like to really have clarity on what is important to you in the business and what is strategically important, and to be able to articulate that to a founder. All the founders I've worked for have been really, really open to like an argument or a position that's grounded in your experience, the data that you have, a really clearly articulated strategy. And so I think it's really finding the balance between sometimes you're going to change course because the founder wants to do that, and that might be the best thing. Other times you might need to be able to push back based on your experience or the data that you have.
Sure.
And I think as long as you can frame that in a way that's really clearly like, this is what I believe is right for the business based on my experience and the data that's in front of me, at least in my experience, founders will listen to that.
Sure. And we look at trial by error. That's what we all have, part of our professional and our personal experiences. If you were to highlight a trial by error that you've learned through your founder partnership, what stands out?
I've seen founder transitions go wrong, and I've seen them go well.
Sure.
For example, when I joined Lunya, I was taking over as CEO from the founder, Ashley, who was looking to take a step back from the day-to-day. And I always say that Ashley is the poster child for a founder who is transitioning responsibility to a new CEO. The way that she handled it was really exemplary. And that goes to preparation and clarification. So before I'd even accepted the job, we were talking about how we were going to divide labor and responsibility, what she wanted to continue to be involved in, and what she was okay to relinquish, which employees or team members she wanted to continue to be in contact with or to continue to advise, and where she didn't need to be involved anymore. And we created a really detailed roadmap for how my responsibilities would expand over time and how hers would decrease over time, and for exactly where and when she was going to continue to be involved in the business. And so we agreed on that between ourselves in really clear terms, and then communicated that really clearly to the teams from the very beginning. And I think because of that, it made for a very smooth and positive transition for everyone involved, I think, certainly for Ashley and me, but also for the team. So I think that clarity is really critical. I've seen it go wrong when that clarity isn't established up front. The most confusing thing for teams is when they have a new leader who's saying one thing and a founder who's saying something different. Like that creates the worst possible kind of spin, and is even further exacerbated like if the founder and the new leader aren't aligned, and then the founder is like going around the new leader and talking to team members. It just creates a ton of spin. So I think there needs to be one really clear vision and really clear lines of communication and reporting from the beginning. The other thing that can really ruin a transition, and I've seen this, I've also seen this, is if a new leader comes in and doesn't respect the founder. Like the founder created the business, like she had the vision, she built the business to where it is today. Like she is the heart and soul of that business. And so I think it's a huge mistake to disregard that or to diminish that. Like I think whether you're like coming in as a C-level employee or a new CEO, or even, anywhere on the team for a founder, it's important to remember that like the founder has a certain level of intuition and knowledge about the business that nobody else has. And that's invaluable.
Absolutely.
And it's a mistake to not take advantage of that.
And we talked about your experiences. If we could take it a step further and really go into an interview structure, at what stage, Blair, do you feel that kind of drilling down into some of these topics and defining responsibilities is appropriate?
I think getting into defining responsibility, comes later when you're either already accepting, you've had an offer, or you're ready to, you're getting close to that place of agreeing that you're going to work together. But I think from the very beginning in the interview process, it's really important to establish that clarity. Like, what exactly does the founder want you to do in your role, in the role that she's interviewing you for? Like, what outcome is she hoping for? How is she going to define success? If you come in, like, what do you need to come in and do in order for her to feel that you've been successful in your role? I think particularly when a founder, like by definition, a founder is never going to know all the functions, right? So there's always going to be something that's a blind spot for her. And so particularly when she's hiring into a function that she might not have experience in, or might not intuitively know or understand, she might have a blurry idea of what it is that you can deliver for the business. And that can result in frustration or disappointment on both sides. If you can't articulate clearly up front, like, what is it that you are hoping I'm going to do? Like, what's your impression or fantasy about what it is that I'm going to be able to deliver? And just make sure that that's actually something that you can deliver and that your skills are aligned with and that you feel is a realistic goal.
And when we talk about realistic goals, you made a statement in our discussions earlier on. I mean, founders are dynamic and they have big picture goals. They have dynamic goals that are sometimes above and beyond what most of us would consider sometimes realistic or unrealistic, but that's what makes them unique and drivers in a business. And I think at the end of the day, that was what makes them a founder. It takes a special person to have the momentum and the drive and the desire to build a business. So when we look at realistic goals, because I feel like, Blair, as an executive that's going through an interview process, you don't want to come off of someone that doesn't feel the goal is not achievable, but how do you articulate it in a way that creates a balance of, okay, that's a goal, but in my expertise, I see us going this route. Have you seen methods that are successful to create more alignment, or maybe bring the goal down to year one versus year two versus year one?
Another way to think about that, and it's another question that I think is important to ask founders, like during that getting to know you or interview process, is aside from a specific goal or a specific goal for your function, what does the founder want to accomplish for the business overall? Like in the 1, 3, 5 year horizon, does she want slow but profitable growth? Does she want to sell the business in 3 years? Does she want to build an empire? I think it's also really important to understand for you if those goals are aligned with your own personal ones. Maybe you don't know, maybe you're just along for the ride, and that's fine too. But understanding that vision for what she wants to do with the business in the short and longer term can also give you a sense of what's possible and what you're going to need to do to support that vision, and also whether or not that's the way you want to work.
Sure, absolutely. Now, we talked about this in one of the suggestions I often make is going to lunch or having coffee or dinner, getting outside of that interview mode. And if there was value there, and how can someone, as a recruiter, I'll push for that. I think it's an important area to be able to get everyone out of interview mode and get to know each other on a personal basis, especially for founder-led companies. Is that something you've done before? Do you feel there's value there? And how would you suggest a candidate kind of push that direction?
I'm trying to remember if I did it. I think I definitely had lunch with Ashley before we joined. I think it's a really good idea. And it goes back to what I was saying before about this is not really corporate, it's personal. We may be moving it towards a more corporate direction. And, the founder's vision may be to build a huge corporate empire over time. But if a founder is still running a business, it is still very much a personal thing. You really can't separate those things, in my opinion. Like, it's her baby. And so, I think, like, to get to know a founder on a personal level and to try to understand a little bit better whether or not your styles are going to be aligned I think it's a really good idea.
And when you think of your journey and some of the interviews you've gone on, I know you've done consulting with founders as well, what would you say are some red flags that you'd highlight to the listeners that they should maybe do a deeper dive or take a step back and process to ensure that it is the right fit?
Yeah. I'm really happy to say that the founders that I have worked for are all women that I consider myself incredibly lucky to know and to have worked with. And so I must have done a good job vetting for myself. I have had interviews with founders where there were some huge red flags for me. I look for a way a founder talks about her existing team. So if she's talking about all the mistakes that her team has made and she's not really able to give her team credit, if she sort of exhibits a perception that she has created her success in spite of her team's shortcomings, like, this is a big red flag. If she's already disappointed or always disappointed with her existing team, like, at some point she's going to be disappointed by you too. Sure. It's sort of impossible to avoid if that is the way she's coming at it. I also look for humility. Like, is she interested in what you have to say? Like, is she really trying to hear your story, or is she mainly talking about herself? Because I've definitely had interviews like that, where you come out and you're like, did she learn anything at all about me in that interview? And if not, how is she gauging whether or not I'm going to be a good fit? Can she articulate her own shortcomings and how she looks to her team to fill those? Does she look, kind of going back to what I was saying before, does she look to the people around her as a resource, or does she look to them as a disappointment? Sure. I think it's just very easy. I think for founders, sometimes because it's so personal, it can feel really black and white. Like, either this person is a superstar or they're a failure. And of course, we know, like, everybody's somewhere in the middle. Like, we all do some things really well, and we all make some mistakes. And so it's not really one or the other. So I also try to get a sense of if the founder can see things that way when it comes to her own team or employees.
Now, I always try to have actionable insights for our listeners to take away, and I would like it to be, focused on the interview. So if you were to highlight, 3 really critical questions to ask a founder that's going to help. Now, look at the interview process as peeling back the onion. And you want to get to that core to really understand the dynamics there. What would you say are 3 questions that are extremely important to put into their kind of interview Q&A?
So, for sure, what will success look like in my role? Mm-hmm. Like, what will I need to do and deliver for you to feel like this has been a successful partnership? I think it's really helpful to understand where a founder sees her strengths and weaknesses and how you're going to be able to complement those. So ask her what she's really good at and where she feels like she's less strong, because that will give you some insight into, like, her level of humility and self-understanding, and also how well she understands what she needs and how you could fit that. I think it's a good idea, and you might not get your answer from the actual answer. You might have to read in between the lines, but I think it's a really good idea to ask a founder what she thinks about her company's culture and how she thinks her own approach or style has informed the company's culture.
Oh, that's a great question. And then we always like to talk about a top tip. So a top tip on one that you have found has really been critical for your success in partnering with these right founders that you've been lucky to work with. They've been lucky to have you work with.
I think it's flexibility. Like I said, it's about really knowing when to push back and when to kind of go with the flow. You do need to be able, again, like this is also just true in general of being in a small business, but you need to be able to react and pivot to change calmly and smoothly and well, but you also need to be able to stand your ground when you feel strongly about something.
And you mentioned something earlier that I think is so critical as well as the influencing a founder. And being able to really, I think in a lot of times, something that I dive into is understanding how they get influenced and what do they look for. Is that something, Blair, that you dive into in the interview process or something you learn along the way? And I ask that because I think that's been feedback that I've received over the years. Well, that surprised me that this, I'm data driven and the data didn't move the needle in the way that I was trying to influence that decision, because every founder is different and, they make different decisions and look at information differently.
It might be worth asking the question. I mean, again, the 3 founders that I've worked for they're all very, very different people and they have different styles, but they are all really receptive to fact-driven, data-driven argument for doing something, but it's certainly worth asking the question. And by the way, that doesn't mean they always do. That doesn't mean they always did what I wanted them to do, but it, again, to the extent that this can feel personal, and also to the extent that a founder very often hasn't had the experience in a big corporate environment because they instead are entrepreneurs or they're founding a business. And so, they're feeling their way through it. And so I think if you can say to a founder, like, based on my experience and based on what I'm seeing, this is what I would recommend that you do, knowing that she might still choose her instinct instead, and her instinct may well be right. I mean, I think that's kind of where it goes back to flexibility, but that would definitely be a good question in the interview process for a founder, is kind of like, okay, what informs your decisions? How do you make decisions? And how do you manage if your leadership team or members of your leadership team disagree with the direction you want to go? Like, what's your approach to handling that?
That's great advice. Great advice. Now, I also want to talk about, as a hiring manager, this is one of my consistent questions I always like to ask. What are some of the top attributes that you look for when you're interviewing candidates?
I am really interested in business passion and acumen. So, like, I want to know, does the candidate, is she familiar with the business that you're in? Does she know your brand? Does she know your competitors? Is she reading the trades? Does she have thoughts on, particular to her own function or just in general, like, what are some things that she's seeing that are really good, things that she's seeing that could be applied to your business? Like, I'm sort of looking to is she out in the world, like listening, hearing, reading, thinking about the business and what makes businesses successful? So I usually do ask a question like that, like, where do you get your information? What are you reading? What other brands in this category are you really interested in? Like, what other brands not in this category are you really interested in, and why? Obviously, that's coming from like a very consumer perspective, but I always want to know about that, because no matter what function you're in, like, you might be a social media manager or you might be a CFO, but I think it's really valuable to know what's happening
Absolutely.
in the business environment that you're working in. I also just look for a super strong work ethic. So I want to know that your work is an important part of your sense of self, your personal identity. Like, for me, those things aren't separate. That's not how I approach my work and my life. I have a family. I have 3 kids. I have like my own personal and social life, but my work is an incredibly important part of who I am to me. And I actually want people who feel the same way, because that's going to contribute to the extent to which they're passionate about making the business successful.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So we are coming to an end, and it always goes by so fast. So I do want to point out for all of our listeners that have been joining us in this journey, this was our first year doing Beauty Talent Talk. We are going to take a break for the rest of the year. So this is the last show for 2025. We're going to be back in January of 2026. And still the goal is to highlight, key speakers, guests, and topics that are going to inspire growth and empower us to continue to evolve. I think that we've seen a lot of change in the beauty industry in the last year and a half, and the more that we can hear great stories. And Blair, thank you for sharing your journey with us and your great insights. I really appreciate the time today. And thank you, listeners, for everyone that's been joining us. And we look forward to seeing you in 2026. Have a great day.